For more on this, I'm joined by Nomi Bar Yaacov, International Peace Negotiator and Fellow at the Geneva Centre for Security Policy. It's a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Leigh-Ann, for having me on your show.
Absolute pleasure. You've had decades of experience in conflict management. How confident are you that ceasefire negotiations between Hamas and Israel can get back on track?
Well, unfortunately, I'm not very optimistic at the moment. I think it really all depends on what US President Donald Trump is willing to do. And I think, if he picks up the phone to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel and says this has to stop, it'll stop. I mean, twice before we have seen that Trump had managed to get to a ceasefire, once in Gaza and once in Iran. Both times Netanyahu did not want to stop the war, but he had no choice. Israel is existentially dependent on the United States, and he holds all the cards, to use his own language. Coupled with that, I think I think he's in great debt to the Emir of Qatar, he being Donald Trump, of course. And I think, yes, he made one phone call to him, but he needs to make another phone call, a concrete one, and say, OK, very sorry about what happened, but now we need to get to a deal. And what do you suggest? And they hammer out a deal, and then they impose it on both sides. But I don't see it happening. This is what I would like to see happening. And I'd like to stress that I don't live in dreamland. But I am, as you say, with decades of experience in negotiations, we know at what stage we're in a crisis, and we're in a very serious crisis at the moment. No one is stopping Netanyahu, not even his own chief of staff, not only his own chief of internal security and Mossad. All of the security establishment, including the army, were against this invasion of Gaza, but they're following orders. They aired their concern, they aired their objection, but he's the prime minister and he has a very, very extreme messianic government, and we are where we're at, and it's a disaster.
And yesterday, the UN Commission said Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. They released a report. Israel has strongly rejected the findings in this report and accuses the UN of being biased. How relevant is the United Nations now in this conflict?
Well, I think we're seeing, as our previous speaker, Tobias Ellwood, said, we're seeing an erosion of the rules-based international order, and we need to get it back on track. And we're waiting for the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, to rule on the South African genocide case, for which many other states have since joined. That is really the top UN body. The commission that gave its opinion, 72-page opinion yesterday, is not considered by Israel a serious commission. So I don't think Israel is going to take any notice of it, but I do think the rest of the world will. The question really is, yet again, who is going to do something about it? Who is going to stop the war in Gaza? And I stress again, the cards really are with US President Donald Trump. And the question is, who's going to whisper in his ear and tell him that he will lose all credibility if he continues to support it?
But I think this is the big question, and I'm sure a lot of the viewers will be wanting to know the answer to this. Why is Donald Trump not stopping Netanyahu?
Well, that is an excellent question, and I don't actually know the answer to that. I think that he was persuaded by Netanyahu that Hamas has to be, quote, unquote, eliminated. And I think that he believes that this is the way to go forward. And that is why I think he probably green-lighted the attack on Doha, and that is why he has green-lighted the attack on Gaza. The current one on Gaza City. It's very clear because Marco Rubio, who was in Israel just on the eve of the attack, made it very clear that the attack has US support. So the question really is, who is advising US President Donald Trump on this? And whoever it is really, has to think and rethink. The problem is with millionaires and billionaires running the world who don't really understand the politics. It's a very, very dangerous position to be in. And I really am fearful that the world isn't necessarily led by proper leaders who understand international politics, but rather by those who have economic interests and economic interests alone.
But I just want to talk about Hamas for a minute too, because Hamas have not surrendered. They've not given Israel back the hostages. This ground offensive in Gaza is entering its second day. 65,000 people have died. Is there any way or anyone who can convince Hamas to give up the hostages and come to a deal too?
Well, I think Hamas is tuned into Qatar, and that's why I reiterate my initial suggestion. I strongly suggest that U.S. President Donald Trump pick up the phone and speak to Sheikh Tamim the Emir of Qatar, Sheikh Tamim bin Abdulrahman Al Thani, because they are the ones that have the respective leverage. And if they can agree between them an end of war, a ceasefire, a flooding of aid into the Gaza Strip and the release of the hostages, then they can impose it on both sides. Yes, true, they're mediators, but mediators also have leverage. Certainly the US has leverage over Israel, and certainly Hamas have leverage over Qatar has leverage over Hamas. So, that's where it's, and they're not going to surrender and release the hostages and give up arms without guarantees. So the question really is to be realistic about this and work out what is feasible and how are they going to end the war. They're going to fight to the bitter end unless a deal is reached. And the deal really is at present up to those two leaders.
And next week at the UN General Assembly, which is happening in New York, the UK, France, Australia and Canada are due to recognise a Palestinian state. What difference will this make, or is this just largely symbolic?
No, I think it's more than symbolic. I think that it's a first step along a long and difficult road to Palestinian statehood, but it's basically stating Palestine cannot be erased. The Palestinians have a right to self-determination, and that right of self-determination has to manifest itself in a sovereign, contiguous, independent state. So by declaring it now, even though the borders are not defined, we all know that the borders are the 1967 Green Line borders with some adjustments of a one-to-one exchange. By one-to-one, I mean that every meter that is given on one side will be sort of adjusted by exchange of a territory on the other side. And it's urgent because you have a very extreme government in Israel and you have a very extreme minister in charge of construction in the West Bank. He is the finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, but he was given also the entire portfolio of construction in the West Bank, and he has announced that he plans to go ahead with what is known as the E1 plan. The E1 plan will sever the West Bank even further, but just cut it in half. And if you look at the map that he has presented in the Israeli parliament and various conferences in the occupied West Bank, it is very, very clear that he has no intention of ever recognize, getting to a Palestinian state. These are moves that are going to ensure, as far as he's concerned, that there won't be a Palestinian state. And today he actually praised the leveling of Gaza. Today he said in a conference, actually a reconstruction conference, a conference on properties, he said that this is the stage one in a fantastic Riviera type project in Gaza, is leveling all of Gaza. And he made it abundantly clear that that is what Israel is doing.
Nomi Bar Yaacov, it was a pleasure to have you on and your thoughts and analysis. Thank you so much for your time.